Hear ye, hear ye. It's time to learn about shadowing and observation hours. In the words of Michael Jackson, don't stop till you get enough. Here's a follow-up for our calls to action from the GPA lecture. Hopefully you completed those. Now, we're going to have a timeout for sports. I forgot about the application timeline questionnaire that I attached in starting out. If you haven't already started filling that out, I'm going to leave it attached with this lecture. And if you've already started using it, this is a reminder for you to go through and continue to update that. It's going to be something that, as we continue to go through each of these videos, you're going to have an opportunity to fill it out, and it'll be useful to help you see how you're progressing. Okay, so what is the purpose of shadowing or getting observation hours? And by now, you should know that that's going and watching or observing a PT or getting hands-on experience and being able to actually treat patients. So, it helps you figure out, do you actually want to become a PT? Do you have an understanding of the scope of PT? What do physical therapists do in a variety of different settings? It helps you figure out if you have an area of interest in PT. And it helps you to build relationships with physical therapists and get an excellent letter recommendation from those therapists. We'll talk more about letters of recommendation later. But going to a setting, building a good rapport with a therapist is essential to help you get a good letter of recommendation. And getting a good amount of hours helps you demonstrate your commitment as an applicant. So how many hours should I have? I wanted to go through and give you this snapshot of all three different categories. So a lot of websites will say applicants only need a minimum of 100 hours to apply. That number is baloney, because in order to actually be competitive, you need at least 2 to 2.5 times that amount. So in that case, it would be 200 to 250 hours. Now, for a lot of programs that maybe aren't as competitive, you can get away with lower amounts of shadowing hours. But from what I've seen, for a lot of the solid programs that are going to provide you with great quality education and a lot of times will be less expensive, 300 to 500 hours is kind of the sweet spot of where you want to get to. This last category, the superstar arena, if you can get over 500 hours, that's great, and it's something that will make you stand out as an applicant. And if you have a job and you work as a tech, it's not hard to be able to get that. But it also comes with a cost. If you are not working as a tech and not making money, getting over 500 hours just by going and shadowing or volunteering is going to be an opportunity cost. And by that I mean you might be spending a lot of time shadowing, but it might take away from other areas of your application that are important. So for that reason, I say get 300 to 500 hours, and I'm going to break down how you should distribute the number of hours for different settings. So before we go on, I want you to pause the video and decide how many hours you want to have for your target. Now this, like I said here, this is not a blood oath. You're not signing your soul away that you have to get 500 hours, but it's going to give you a target, and it'll help you break down, okay, if I want to have 300 hours, I need to get X amount of hours per week while I'm in school to be able to get that. If you don't have a target, you're just going to be wasting your ammo. You're just going to be spending your time thinking, well, I'm just going to get some hours, and you'll kind of just aimlessly rack up hours. And it's way more effective to say, I want to get 400, and this is how I'm going to do it. If you get more than that, great. If you undershoot it by a little bit, that's okay. But go ahead, pause the video, think about, okay, this is how many hours I want to get, and we'll talk about how you can break down, do some math, and figure out what you need to do to get there. All right, so hopefully you picked out that number. And now we're going to talk about quality, not quantity. So this rule I've made up through my research as I've looked into things from different schools. And the rule is 3-4-3-5-4-6. Sorry, I even confused myself with that one. So you want 300 to 500 hours in 4 different settings, observing 6 different patient populations. Okay? So that's the 3-5-4-6 rule. 300 to 500 hours, 4 different settings, 6 different patient populations. Kind of a good rule of thumb. Now, I'm not going to go through and read all of this description. This is from the PTCast observation hour instructions, which you will use to input your hours. Excuse me. So the only thing I'll say is inpatient, patient stays overnight. Outpatient, patient does not stay overnight. If you want to look into more detail about these, go ahead and feel free to pause the video and read over them. Patient populations. These are all pretty straightforward. And again, you're going to want to have 6 different patient populations that you're observing. Now, if you're feeling somewhat overwhelmed and you just want to crawl into a blanket like this little guy here, let's break this down for you, because it might sound overwhelming depending on where you're at in the process. You may be saying, hey, I'm doing great, or I've already exceeded where I think I should be at. So here's the breakdown. Now, your primary source of hours, for those of you who are lucky enough to get a tech job, you can pretty easily start racking up these hours, especially if you work more than 1 day a week as a tech. If you are working 8 hours during the week, you can see how over an extended period of time you can rack up your hours pretty quickly. So getting a primary source of shadowing, whether this is somewhere that needs volunteers regularly, whether it's a job, something like that, you want to get the bulk of your hours there. And then the other 3 or more settings that you observe in, you want to give at least 25 hours devoted to that setting. If you can get more, that's great, but 25 hours is kind of a good cutoff. And that's because after you've been there for that amount of time, you have a pretty good feel for what that setting is all about. Another caveat for this, some schools require a certain number of hours in a certain setting. I remember I looked at University of Florida, and they required that you shadow for at least 40 hours in a neurological setting. So it just depends on the school. Some of them don't care. Some of them won't look at your work hours as observation hours. So that makes things a little bit more complicated. So you really need to know your school and to know the shadowing requirements for the schools that you want to apply to. All right, so let's break down some math for you. So we've got 400 hours as a hypothetical target for our shadowing hours. Let's say I'm starting my sophomore year, and I want to apply the summer after my junior year. So I've got about 2 years to get 400 hours. Now, that's 200 hours per year, not hard math there. And then if I do 200 hours divided by 52 weeks, that is about 4 hours per week, which infinitely seems much more manageable than just saying, I want to get 400 hours. So whatever your number is, whatever your timeline is, I would recommend doing this exercise. Break down how many hours you need to do per week so you can make it much more manageable. Thinking about getting 500 hours is a little overwhelming when you've got all these other things to consider. But break it down, and at the end of the next couple slides, we'll talk about how am I going to be able to find where to go shadowing. Okay, so this is true with anything in life. The earlier you get started on your shadowing hours, the happier you're going to be. Conversely, if you start late, your life you will hate, because it's going to be super stressful. You're not going to have as good of an experience. You won't learn as much when you go to the settings because you're just focused on, I need to get this amount of hours. But start early, live happy. Okay? Don't cram it all into the summer right before you apply, because I promise you that's going to be really, really stressful.